Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Slime Time, where we bring you the latest news on everything Dragon Quest related. I return with Matt Craft. Say hello, Matt.
Hi.
And we have a new person welcoming us. Say hello.
Hey, this is Liam Land from GameFAQs and what is his Dragon's Den?
Oh, we have someone from GameFAQs with us. Glad to have you with us. Today, we will be talking about one of the more interesting titles in Dragon Quest history, Dragon Quest II. The reason I say it has an interesting history is it did a lot of good things to the series, and a lot of bad things. But we'll be getting to that. Now, first of all, we're going to be talking about changes from the first to second game. Back during the days of the first game, we really had nothing to really compare it to, unless you were the odd one out who liked to play Dragon Quest board game. I mean, not Dragon Quest, but like RPG board games, or the occasional dice rolling game like Dungeons and Dragons. Like before Dragon Warrior, there really wasn't anything here in the States that really had this kind of appeal, unless you were a PC gamer. But you know, I'm not gonna get into that. But it's a lot of things have changed, definitely. The first thing of note is that, first of all, we got a huge change of scope. Whereas before, you were kind of stuck in a single landscape and just kind of fiddled your way through it while traveling from town to town. Here, we had several different continents that you had to travel, not only by land, but also by sea. They also introduced something called the teleporting shrines, which basically let you warp from place to place instantaneously, hugely cutting down on the amount of time it took from going to place. Now, this also meant that the game became a little more streamlined in the sense that you really didn't have to do as much walking around, and thus the overall experience had changed. Now, whether this was for good or for bad really depends on personal taste. Me, I kind of liked it. What are your guys' feelings on it?
Well, the first major thing that I noticed difference, when I started playing Dragon Warrior 2, and I mean this game came out in 1990, so I was about 11 years old, one of the major things I noticed is that during the battle system, the background just changed to all black. So, I mean, normally where you'd have, in the background, you'd have the terrain where you're fighting the monster, usually in fields. In Dragon Warrior 2, I guess, I'm not really sure why, maybe it was just the scope of the game was too large and they had to cut back. I thought that was a definite loss. Where all of a sudden, in the battles, it's like, they're telling you to use your own imagination. It's just a black background and nothing else.
I never noticed that when I first played the game, too. Because I played Dragon Warrior before, too, so I was kind of used to that. But when I stuck 2 in, I almost couldn't tell. I think maybe it's just because the game started out with such a grim and dark opening that I felt like the black background almost attributed to that. Like they're actually trying to display just how much darker this game is going to be in terms of presentation. And you're right, though, it is a stark difference. And I can only imagine that it's due to limitations of the game data. Because of so much more that was added, they had to sacrifice some things to make it all fit. Because, this is back in the days when compression wasn't really as big a thing as it is now, so they had to cut corners where they could.
Do you know if they put that back in? I don't remember if they put that back into the Game Boy Color release or the Super Famicom version.
Yes, they actually did. And
I thought definitely for the Super Famicom version, but I wasn't sure about Game Boy Color.
Yeah, there were more data on the Super Famicom and the GB Color cartridges, so they were able to fit backgrounds in there, in those.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, that background doesn't change again until Dragon Quest V came out for the Super Famicom. Years and years later, the black background stayed for Dragon Warrior 3 and 4.
Another stark change was that not only did you have more than one party member, but multiple enemies would fight you at once, adding a huge experience to the game that was not there before. Because, battles were kind of stark and plain stock in the original game. It was basically one-on-one struggles, and there were very little strategies to have. It was usually press button to fight or press button to cast spell. It was very simplistic. And here, though, we had a huge change in strategy, because we had enemies that would overwhelm you if you didn't come prepared. And another thing that helped this is that each party member had a role now. It wasn't just the fact that you had one character that was good at everything. No, the different statistics in the game were actually divided between three characters. One who was the buff guy, one who was the balanced character, and one who was all magic. And I thought this was a huge benefit to the game, because it added a new layer of depth. Like, you actually had to think in battle. You couldn't just mash the attack button. You'd die if you did that. And I just love this so much. I've heard some people say it added more complexity to the game, and as a result made it too difficult. But what are your feelings on that?
I'd have to say, complexity-wise, honestly, I grew up playing Ultima, Wizardry, all the crazy PC and NES point and clicks. Dragon Quest turned it from a basic... sorry. Dragon Quest turned it from a point-and-click interface to simple button menus and mashing. So to me, it wasn't anywhere near as complex as what I grew up playing.
Oh, well, we have a PC gamer with us. Well, that'll add a new perspective to this, definitely. Because you, more than anyone, will notice the huge change in scope from PC to console during that era.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I admit I never grew up with many PC RPGs. The first one I ever experienced was, ironically, Ultima 3, and the one I played was on the NES. And while that one was a little more streamlined, it was still mostly faithful to the original, and I got the crap kicked out of me when I played that. But going back to the original subject, do you have anything to add, Liam, about how you felt about the party system in this?
Well, I liked the fact that you had to kind of search and find your party members, as it starts out with just Prince of Midenhall, and you're going around solo battling multiple monsters, and it's kind of an intense way to start. Overall, I thought Kanik was a little weak, and it's frustrating because he's the only one with the revive spell. And he's always the first to die, so I mean that can be that makes the game that much more challenging, but also really just frustrating.
Now, a lot of people also cried foul in the later versions of the game, where you would get far enough in, and there was like a hidden trap within the game, where the Prince of Canuck would actually fall sick, and you would actually have to search for a special remedy to cure him. People were like, "Oh, great! You were already dead way before, but now you're just overstaying your welcome." And I'm just like, well, come on, give the guy a break. I mean, they make it pretty clear early on that he has been frail since he was born, so it's not like he can help it very much. And they did improve him in the remakes, at least, so it's not like he's all bad now. And I will say, as far as the NES version is concerned, there was a definite lack in balance, because the two characters you would recruit later on really did not have the best in terms of equipment, and you did kind of have to toddle them a little bit as you went through the game. because they started out pretty weak, and you would generally have to make sure that they had healing spells always on standby, which usually would mean you can't use their attack magic very much, which means they wouldn't be doing much of anything. So there is a balance issue. However, the thing that most people don't understand, though, is that they were, I think, trying to push the class system from a lot of different types of games throughout the series and try to implement it to where it added a new layer of entertainment to the series. The first run with it just wasn't very good. But they would get better at it, as we'll see next time. But aside from that, we also got a new change to where you really no longer had to prepare near as much for dungeons, because in this one, the dungeons were not dark anymore, they were fully lit, and they were laid out in a way to where you weren't getting lost as much. They were a lot more linear in terms of pathways. I admit I kind of missed the dungeons from the first one, since I felt there was a layer of danger going through the dungeons in that one, and you really didn't feel as safe anymore. But
yeah, definitely when the radiant spell starts to wear off and your window of vision just gets smaller and smaller, is that element of danger in the first one.
And I've heard some people say, wait, you liked getting lost in dungeons all the time? And I was like, well, I wouldn't say I enjoyed getting lost per se, but you have to understand, in a situation like that, it does make you feel a little bit less like you're prepared for the place and more like this place is really challenging you. Because when you can't immediately dash to the dungeon, you're forced to really prepare and work your way through this dungeon. You feel like it's a trial. You feel like this place is dangerous. Whereas in Dragon Warrior 2, the dungeon just feels like an obstacle. It just feels like it's something that's in your way. You get through it real quick, and that's it. There's no real danger to it because you know it's not very long, and you know that it's not going to do much to challenge you.
It's completely unexplained how well lit it is. It's just it is what it is. There's no torches or anything.
There is only one dungeon in Dragon Warrior 2 that gives us any type of real challenge, and that is the Cave Tyrone. All the other dungeons in this game are so easy to get through, it's pathetic. And I have brought this up to people, and I've said, just because a dungeon is short doesn't mean it has to be easy. I'm aware of that. However, the problem is that the dungeon really doesn't give you much in the way of hazards either. Like, people might bring up, well, what about the lava caves? That place was kind of treacherous. I said, your first time. But once you're actually used to how it works, it's pretty quick and painless. You can dash through it without much getting in your way. And I think that's the biggest problem here, is that the way it's set up, most of the dungeons in this game are only hard if you don't know the proper route. But once you do know it, it suddenly becomes a lot more simplistic. And I don't know, that to me is something that I think the game could have worked a little more on. But that's just me. And it's not something that ruins the game experience or anything, but it's something I noticed as I was playing through it again, preparing for this podcast. Now, another noticeable difference is that whereas in the first game, you really only had one area you could really have as a sort of a hub castle where you could, like, heal up and whatnot and save your game. In this game, there were over 12 places to save all throughout the game. And the Wing of the Wyvern would take you to the last place you visited, so you didn't have to backtrack near as much in this game. Oh, I love it. I love this change so much. This really excited me when I first played it because I'm like, what the? I could save at other places. And like, I don't know. I don't even have to be at a castle sometimes. I could be at a random town and save. That is amazing. And that to me was just extremely useful, especially when I was on long trips and not knowing where I was supposed to be going. It always put a smile on my face knowing that I found a new save point, so I didn't have to lose all my progress. So, what are your guys' feelings on that change?
I wanted to add something on the whole dungeoneering aspect of it.
Okay.
You know, it's funny. If you went into a dark dungeon without a torch or any sort of light, and actually it got adopted by a few of the games, what was a point-and-click adventure / text adventure game called Zork. If you didn't have light, you got eaten by a grue.
You got what?
You got eaten by an unseen monster called a grue, and the game ends.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, that's what I always thought about people trying to run around in the dungeons and stuff without light. Someone's just complaining about it. I just go, at least you didn't get eaten by a grue.
Yeah. Admittedly, that's a pretty interesting concept, and it's something that I can't imagine people would accept too well if that was in Dragon Quest, because, you know, they'd be like, oh great, so you're forcing me to carry torches now. Thanks a lot, game. But yeah, it does sound interesting, nevertheless. And let's see, aside from all those changes that we made, the only other thing that I think we haven't touched on is the fact that also, this is the first game to actually have boss fights in it. Like, people say technically the Green Dragon from the original and the Axe Knight might count up as bosses, but they're basically just early difficult encounters, whereas here, we got a special boss fights that we got to fight. And some of them were pretty freaking hard, man. And what were your feelings when you first went into the final dungeon and you ran into this giant Cyclops monster that killed your party members in one hit?
Frustration.
Yeah, I was like, that just surprised me, because I'm like, wait, what? Like, are you supposed to be a boss? Because, you know, back in these days, video games didn't really have, like, different music for different types of encounters. So I didn't know what to expect at first, because that's the first thing I saw when I went in. So at first, I was like, are all the enemies going to be this tough? So I was very glad to find out differently, but that's one big change that I think a lot of people kind of, like, get cross-eyed at. They see these special encounters that just murder them, and they're like, okay, unfair balance much? Of course, it should be used to that. They are in Rhone, after all. It's not like Rhone is known for kind of being nice about their random encounters, but...
yeah, I mean, the only thing I think that frustrates me the most about Rhone was the fact that there were so many unblockable death spells.
Yeah.
And that's just terribly frustrating. Frustrating way to end the game. Tesla, I'm hearing some reverb. Did something change on the mic?
No. Is it still there?
Yeah. It wasn't there before.
Okay. Testing. Is it still there?
Yeah.
Dead blame.
It's a weird like choppy echo when I talk. That wasn't there before.
Well, I can't move the mic any farther, otherwise I won't be able to pick you guys up, so... back. Okay, it looks like the problem was taken care of. I guess I have to reset Skype every so often. But, anyways, my opinions on Roan. Are you guys gonna get mad if I say I actually liked the way Roan was handled?
How so?
Okay. To understand the way I'm going here, you have to look at this from the hero's perspective. You have just traveled the entire journey, going through a lot of distant lands, a lot of challenging new areas, and you finally got all the artifacts you need to enter the headquarters of the most powerful wizard in the land. And you've traveled through a treacherous cave with lots of different areas for you to figure out that challenged not only your body but your mind as well, since you had to figure out past Hargon's methods of getting through the cave. And you're in this new area, an area ruled by the most powerful wizard in the land. Would you expect going through this territory of Hargon to be a cakewalk? Is it too much to ask that the personal guardians of Hargon wouldn't have access to this powerful magic that they would use to take you out? Because from my point of view, it makes total sense that they would be this strong. Because that Hargon is probably getting pissed off that you're making it this far to begin with. So he's going to go out of his way to make sure you're taken out, using any means necessary at his command. So from my perspective, I really don't have a problem with this. The only problem I think this has is that I think the game developers almost made it an incentive to actually get here as early as possible, because this is where all the experience is. I think that's the only really big problem here, is that the game is giving you a huge incentive to want to fight here, even with the danger. And I really don't think that's fair, because, the experience in the rest of the game is kind of lackluster, unless you fight 4 green dragons or whatnot, but that's about it. Everything else kind of sucks. So,
here's how difficult Roan is. I mean, I went, and the last time I played it on my cell phone, just with an emulator on my commute, and I leveled up all the characters to their max. So Middenhall was at 50, Kennick was 45, and Moonbrook was 35, and they were still getting completely trounced by the enemies on the path to Roan. It was just the unblockable death spells were it's a complete crapshoot. It's just luck, which can be both challenging and frustrating, I think. But they do give you some incentives to take advantage of certain things, like when you fight those mini bosses before you face Hargon. They are randomly generated when you step past a certain point. So once you beat them, you can go all the way back to the save point and heal up. You just can't hard reset.
Yeah, I actually remember the player's guide actually talked about that. Oh, that's something I forgot to really mention. If you, actually, you know what? I'm gonna hold off on saying that, because that would actually apply more to the next section of our discussion. But more or less, I actually found out about that through a book I had, and I took way advantage of that, because I would fight one super boss, then I would go and rest, and then I'd fight the next one, and so on. Because let's say the Roan monsters aren't the only people that have access to instant death spells. One of the super bosses does as well, so I didn't want to take any chances. Thankfully, if you died from one of them, they don't automatically reset, so you can go back and fight them again.
You mean all 3 of them don't reset?
Yeah, all 3 of them don't reset if you die, so you don't have to worry about that.
They only reset if you do a hard reset, or if you save the game and reset, then they'll show up again.
Yep.
There was another exploit in the game that I think is worth mentioning, and that's the double water flying close.
Yeah, I've actually every time I play the NES version, I actually rely on that. Because again, lackluster equipment options, people. Like, the Prince of Connacht gets nothing in terms of armor equips. Like, the best he can get is close hiding, which ironically, if you look at the official art, is made for female characters. Because if you've seen the original artwork, close hiding especially looks like a robe and whatnot. And I'm just like, yeah, I can totally see the Prince of Connacht, like, traveling wearing a robe, definitely. But anyway, yeah, the water flying cloth.
There's an interesting fact. That's the first Dragon Warrior game to include cross-dressing. well before Dragon Quest IX.
Yeah, and if you've seen the official art for the water flying cloth, it's a dress.
It definitely is.
So yeah, Prince of Connacht, we need you to wear this dress. And I can just imagine the reaction on his face. He's like, it'll help you. And he's like, you seriously want me to go into town wearing this? He's like, well, it's either this or you get murdered by green dragons.
Which is probably going to happen anyway, but...
And he's like, I hate all of you. And, yeah, that is a big problem that Dragon Warrior 2 had, is that a lot of his equipment options were very, very light armor. And if it wasn't for the War Flying Cloth, he would just not have anything. But,
So did they get rid of that in the Super Famicom and Game Boy Color versions? Those are the versions I played the least, so...
You couldn't...
I don't remember.
You couldn't glitch the Water Flying Cloth, but they did at least allow better armor options for the Prince of Connacht, as well as the ability to equip the Light Sword. Thank you, God! I was like, thankfully, he can equip strong weapons now, because before, the best weapon he had was the Iron Spear.
Yeah, he had that for like 80% of the game.
Yeah. In the NES version, you would usually get the Falcon Sword as early as possible, because at least he could attack twice with that. But in the new version, the Falcon Sword really isn't as effective until he's like level 35. So yeah, I do appreciate that. Of course, the remake also changed the effectiveness of spells as well. Yeah, before, your spells wouldn't do like more than 50 damage. But in the remakes, your spells would do as much as 100. And the spells cost less MP too, so you were just like, well, I guess I don't need the Prince of Midenhall anymore. The mages can do all the work now. It's just like, wow. That was just ridiculous. It also...
Once Moonbrook learns Exploded, I think, or Exploded, it levels the playing field a lot more in terms of the battles. It's such a powerful explosion spell.
And on that note, have we talked about all the changes to Dragon Warrior 2? I do believe we have.
Was the Dragon Quest II Famicom version, was that the first one to actually show the character changing positions and facing the direction that they were supposed to move?
No.
The original DQ1, the Japanese version, it was just a single icon that moved around and didn't really face.
You talked about the Famicom version. Yeah, you're right. Because the Famicom version of Dragon Quest was not very good, from what I can tell, since the sprites were kind of Ultima-ish in design. They looked pretty standard fare, and there wasn't any identifying features. That changed in the one for the stage, Dragon Warrior, because the creators actually cleaned up the sprites for the one we got over here. And people liked it so much that they actually remade the Famicom version to have the same type of color palette that the NES version had. Which I just think is hilarious. That the Japanese version liked ours so much that they had to have their own version of it. But, But yeah, Dragon Quest II actually had some pretty decent character designs, considering how limited they were with the colors. Because, you know, you could tell by looking at each character who they were and what they represented. Like you could tell by looking at the Prince of Mendenhall that he was the buff one. You could look at the princess and tell she was the mage, because she looked like it. And they did a pretty good job with the designs there. With one,
except that Mendenhall wore goggles that looked like he was a pilot, but there were no airships or planes or anything. I just thought that was kind of funny.
I never really noticed the goggles. I thought those were actually just his eyes. So, that is very nice for pointing that out. And also, the one problem with the color palette, though, is they didn't really have identical color for the princess's hood. So for all practical purposes, you actually thought that was her hair. And because it didn't show up very well. And that's something that always got me, because I liked the way she looked in the NES version. But when I saw her in later games, I was like, why are you wearing the hood? And I've had people point out to me, I was like, well, she always wore a hood. It just didn't appear that well in the NES version. And I'm like, are you serious? The hood looks stupid. And they said, it kind of does, but what you gonna do? It's her original design. And I'm like, whatever. But yeah, like, but I said anyway that was something I actually noticed. But at this point, I think we have to actually move on to the second area of discussion, which is the localization. Now, in terms of localization, things weren't near as severe as they were with the first game, because the first game had a very, very limited budget here in the States, and they had to go out of their way to try to ensure that the game sold. Although I've heard from Dwayne that it really didn't help that much, but it helped some, because Nintendo Power did help them gain some hype, and they did make... It was either Enix themselves or Nintendo actually made special booklets, as well as maps, as well as an experience card, a small, like, not plaster, but, like, I'm trying to remember what it was made out of. Like, there was this fabricated card that had all, like, the experience levels and whatnot in it, and they did a good job with that. And when they made Dragon Warrior 2, they made a special scroll-like map, that world map that came with the game. And it was a pretty nice thing to have, because the world map is very detailed, and on the left and right side, it had official real-life art of all the weapons and armor throughout the game. And I wish I still had that map, so I could, like, show it off, because that was awesome.
Yeah, I lost mine as well. I was so frustrated. I couldn't find it.
And, also, at this time, they actually came out with the Nintendo Power Player's Guide for Dragon Warrior 1 and 2. Because I remember having that, and that's how I found out where to get most of the crests in the game. Because I could not, for the life of me, find them on my own. I needed some type of guide for it. And my parents got me the Nintendo Power's Player's Guide. I managed to figure out where the crests were at. And it also had a special section called Counselor's Corner, where it told you about how to avoid the holes in the Cave Tyrone. And I'm like, oh, thank you. That helps so much. That was definitely helpful. And I think that aside from that, the only other thing I remember it having was a small booklet detailing some of the storyline to Dragon Warrior 2. Unfortunately, much like the first game, where it kind of had this really romanticized version of the Japanese plot, this one wasn't much better, because it basically told you that that Hargon was apparently supposed to be a necromancer that like had powers over the dead and whatnot, and like had he was like taking control of monsters, and he was trying to take control of the land, and you had the three. Right after that, it said, "Behold, you must take roles of the three children of Erdrick to follow his lineage and go throughout the land." And people are quick to point out they weren't the three. Those three weren't the children of Erdrick. They were descendants of Erdrick. There's a difference, and Erdrick's not even mentioned hardly in this game. I'll say it as equipment options. So. Yeah, once again, Nintendo really didn't know what they were doing when it came to those little quips about the storyline. But it's just mostly ignorable. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything. But aside from that, I think that's all the different changes that they actually did when it came to localization. And I thought they were neat. And I especially love the map most of all, but there weren't anything major here though. Like you didn't have any special dose Nintendo power to get the game for free or anything. But I do like what Nintendo gave us. What are your guys' feelings on that?
To be honest, I played the Game Boy Color version, and
Matt, you're cutting out.
sorry. I played the Game Boy Color version when I played Dragon Quest II for the first time, so I didn't really experience the Nintendo localization.
Ah.
So for me, there was no real version differences. I had backgrounds, Blaze, and Zap, and what have you.
Ah. Okay. Well.
Yeah. I didn't really notice anything localization because I hadn't played the Japanese version. But yeah, I mean, I remember being really excited that there was a sequel to Dragon Warrior that was coming out, and then when it did, and around that time, I think at some point after the release of Dragon Warrior 2, you had the Dragon Warrior anime show featuring the hero Abel began airing on television. I remember seeing references in the show that would later show up in Dragon Warrior 3, like a Lihan or a Raihan and Najimi Tower, and it was cool to just have that TV show. I know it was short-lived, but to have that supplement the game, I just enjoyed watching that when I was a kid.
Oh yes, the Dragon Warrior show that was so 80s it hurts. I love that show so much. It's just like when they made it, like you could tell they threw as many 80s jokes as possible. It was like TMNT meets Dragon Warrior. It was awesome. I was just like, because I know I was watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles around the same time I was watching Dragon Warrior, and I was like, oh man. Like you could tell the inspiration from that show was like from a bunch of these old cartoons, like the Street Fighter action show, like Teen Mutant Ninja Turtles, and what was that other one that was so popular? I can't remember. But yeah, I actually saw a couple episodes of that growing up, and I didn't see the rest till I was much older. And I was like, oh man. All I've got to say is, fans of Dragon Warrior are probably insulted by this show. Because it's...
it's got a cult following. I definitely enjoy it. I know it's very, very dated at this point, but it's still enjoyable for nostalgic purposes. I mean, it even featured some of Koichi Sugiyama's orchestral music, which is probably the first time fans were hearing it at the time. In full orchestral sound, and it was featuring music from the games that were not even out yet. So you had music from Dragon Warrior 3, and then I think even the balloon theme from Dragon Warrior 4 shows up in the show at some point.
Yeah. I'll take your word for that. I don't remember it too well, but yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. Aside from that, the only other thing that we have to discuss when it comes to Dragon Warrior 2 is our personal feelings on the game. Personally, I love Dragon Warrior 2. It ranks as my top 3 games, just because of how fun it is to just play through the game. Mostly the remakes, but I give the NES version some love too, because it is responsible for a lot of fun that the series had. And as much as people would hate to admit it, Dragon Warrior 2 is the only reason we ever got Dragon Warrior 3. So
That's a good point.
So if anything, you have to give it credit just because of that, let me tell you, because people love that one. And I've played through that game more times than I can count. And I've become such a master at it, I could probably beat it in like 3 hours at this point. And I will say there are some things I wish it did better. Like I wish the crafts were a little better explained. I kind of wish that there were more use for some of the keys throughout the game, since I think the Wargate key is only used once, and the Jailer's key is only used like 3 times, but for the most part, though, I thought the game was pretty well balanced for what it was. It had a lot of really nice looking areas too. Remember when you first got on your ship and you went a little bit to the right and you were back in the wood from Dragon Quest 1? What was your reaction to that?
I've always liked the music from the Olive Garden continent in 2 to 1. I thought it was more mysterious sounding.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that feeling of nostalgia when you take, the ship is the first game to have a ship in DW2, and then you finally do get to this continent and realize it's a left guard when you step on it and you hear the music. It's an intense feeling the first time you're playing it, as long as you played 1 first.
And while I admit, due to data limitations, they couldn't bring back all the towns and all the places to visit, but for what we got, it was still a nice trip to the past for me. And I did kind of like how it shows how much things have changed in the world, because the world that was in full control in the first game have now pretty much became a second-hand area in the game. And we get the brave king from the first game, who has essentially become a coward because he can't stop Hargon's forces. So he's pretty much said, you know what, screw this position. I'm gonna let the people take care of themselves. And he hides in his little corner, and I'm just like, our responsible king, everyone. Yeah, I don't think. Go ahead.
Did it bother anybody that Tantagel and Brecconary kept changing positions depending on which game in the Erdrick trilogy you were playing?
Well,
you ever notice that? Like in Dragon Warrior 1, Brecconary was northeast of Tantagel, and then in DW2 it was flush left of the city. The city and the castle and the town are now the same place, just one right next to each other, and then in Dragon Warrior 3, it's now on a path in the distance to east of Brecconary.
Yeah, I think that's because Dragon Quest 3 was technically a prequel to Dragon Quest 1, so I think that explains somewhat.
I don't know. Is it a continuity issue that what do you think? Do you think the castle and the town were being ravaged by monsters and razed to the ground so often that they had to keep rebuilding it? Resulting in it's close to spec but slightly different each time? Or are those just continuity errors?
I really don't know. Well, one problem it could be is that this might be a Japanese thing. I haven't played the Japanese game, so maybe the positions are switched, kind of like how the accept and cancel buttons are switched for Japanese consoles. I don't know. I'd actually have to talk to someone about that. I suppose that could be the case, but it's something I never really noticed all that much. I just figured it was just a design choice for when you're inside a town. But it also, is it just me, or for as much danger as the world's in, why are the townspeople so chipper most of the time? Because it's just like, oh hey, yeah, the world's in grave danger, we're all being hunted by monsters, but sure, I can sing a song for you. I'm just like, wow.
They're all on antidepressants or something.
Although, you have to admit, that one lady in the town where you get the light sword, she has a beautiful voice for 8-bit. Like, seriously, like, when Saigon was doing the Dragon Quest II run, I was actually trying to get him to have the lady sing. He's like, no! And I'm like, aww. But she worked so hard to be good at her singing, and he's like, I don't care. This game's gonna drag on enough as it is. I'm not gonna take the time to listen to her sing. And I'm like, fine.
Well, the music was both good and bad in this game. I mean, I think the walking theme actually got worse once you had Moonbrook.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it was
the second world map theme.
I thought I liked it better when it was just Kanak and Middenhall, the walking theme.
I like the emotion. Like when you first start out, like the music gives you the feeling of like your journey is just starting, and I think the first one's called The Lonely Prince, and it has this emotion of you're on this journey, you don't have any real experience yet, and the music really did a good job just kind of describing the emotion that you're on this epic journey, and I don't know, it just felt really good. And when you got the prince and princess, the emotion started changing, where you got the feeling that the journey that was going to get more dangerous, and the music displayed that if you pay attention to the notes. And I'm just like, I really like the subtle change to that. Well, I will say I like the first world map theme better. I still really love to listen to the second world map theme. It's actually on my computer somewhere.
I think I just thought it was too positive and upbeat, for the theme of the game. Matt, what do you think?
I have to agree with you there entirely. I don't know. It just, when I first heard it, I was like, what? This is too positive. It really is. You're supposed to be saving the world from a super evil sorcerer, not going on a jaunt to the corner store.
But it might be personal taste then, because to me I didn't really get the same impact as that. I just got like they were going for an epic journey feel. So it just might depend on personal taste. But to me, I've always liked that song. Not so much the remixes of it in later games. I thought the Super Nintendo one was okay. I hate the one in the Wii version. The trilogy. That one can suck off. I hate the drums. The drums are what ruin it for me. And I've told this to people. I'm like, why you do this, Armor Project? Like, you take a song that sounds so good, and yet you add these drums to it. Like you wanted to add more impact to the song.
I've not heard it, but I'm going to look it up now.
Drop that bass, huh?
It's like when they added drums to the Super Mario Brothers 3 music when you're underground. But that's another podcast.
I'm just like, it's the little changes like that sometimes that I just find annoying. But I don't know. To me, Dragon Quest II is a very standard game, and it's a game that I can pretty much sit down and play at any time because it's short, and if you're playing the remake, it's fairly easy to play through. But yeah, that's all I have to add. So if you guys don't have anything, we can bring this to an end.
Yeah, I'm all set.
Okay. This has been Slime Time, talk about Dragon Quest II. I hope you guys enjoy it, and we will see you guys later. Signing off.